Good morning, everybody. My name is Josh Stanton. I'm the head of public diplomacy at the British Embassy in Washington. Thank you so much for joining us today for our event on growing the green economy. We have a really fantastic lineup for you today. We will get started very shortly. I just want to very quickly go over a few technical details before we start things off. We are obviously doing this on the Zoom webinar platform. All of our attendees are able to view the event today, but unfortunately will not have video or audio capability through the duration of the event. However, we are absolutely encouraging you to ask questions of our panel, and to do so, you will be asked to put that through the Q&A function, which you can find on the lower middle taskbar. If you would like to ask a question, please identify yourself and your affiliation, and then with your question, and we will make sure to filter those to our moderator to put to the panelists today. We will also be recording this event. This will be made available on YouTube later today as well. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Ambassador Karen Pierce, who is the British ambassador to the United States, who will be providing some brief opening remarks. And I'll turn it over to her now. Ambassador Pierce.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Josh, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us to launch the US State Green Economy Report, and we really want to use today to discuss how green economy collaboration between the US and the UK can deliver jobs and growth. I think this is a very important area of climate change management tackling that deserves greater study. Now, we're very delighted as the UK with Italy to be hosting COP26 in November in Glasgow. It's going to be a key milestone for efforts to decarbonize the global economy. It's an opportunity for countries to come forward with their own ambitious new climate commitments. And in that respect, I wanted to salute President Biden and the Earth Day Summit on 22 April. This was a fantastic step forward, with the US committing to 50 to 52% reductions, and other countries coming forward as well. And we hope that that will give all countries the spur to help us make a step change in tackling climate change at COP26. As far as the UK goes, ourselves, we have brought forward 78% of our commitments to net zero by 2035. This is over 1990 levels, so that's one of the most ambitious pledges in the world, and we're going to legislate for that. So it's really going to be a major effort of the British government, and we recently published an integrated review that brings together our foreign and economic policy with our defence policy, and tackling climate change is badged in that as the most important international priority that we have at the moment. So our commitment is there. We know that President Biden and Secretary Kerry and the US administration are equally committed. Now, I wanted to say that delivering on the nationally determined contribution in the US, the NDC, this is not only, of course, about what the federal government does. I want to salute all those states and governors and city halls who have been doing so much to make progress at the state and local level, and also salute what the private sector has been doing on the real economy. There have been some fantastic moves there to keep the level of US commitment to climate change high. This is happening right the way across the United States. Whenever I phone governors, there's always something we can talk about decarbonisation. And again, you'll find that they are very interested in the jobs and growth angle. Now, as COP26 co-president, we, the UK, are very committed to working with all actors to realise the transition to net zero. Our diplomatic presence across the US, our policy teams, our press officers, our consuls general, our Department for International Trade, we have integrated climate into everything that we do, and we are committed to climate action that leaves no one behind while it grows the economy. A green and resilient recovery from COVID is absolutely central to this, and we believe that that in turn will create employment in industries of the future, and it will also address the urgent and linked challenges of public health, climate change and biodiversity loss. Our Prime Minister has introduced a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, and that sets the UK on a path to achieving its climate goals while supporting up to 250,000 new jobs by 2030. And we like to think that's a very significant figure. We are also investing in innovation and deployment of cutting-edge technologies like offshore wind, hydrogen, and carbon capture. And we are really pleased to be able to work with the US right the way across the United States and at all levels of government and society to accelerate the uptake of these technologies. We commissioned the US State Green Economy Report to do a deep dive into what's been driving growth of the US green economy at a state level, to provide a tailored insight into the short-term outlooks of these states' green economies, and to make recommendations for how we can best engage at the subnational level to be able to take forward climate and investment priorities. So I'm really excited about today's event, looking forward to hearing more about the results of the report and the panel discussion, which is going to explore these important areas in more depth. Thank you once again for joining us, and it's now my very great pleasure to hand over to one of the best media people in the business, Steve Clemens, who is the editor-at-large for The Hill. Thank you very much for joining us, Steve.
Ambassador Pierce, thank you so much. We've got a great panel to discuss these issues about climate. And I was thinking today that if you kind of think back 2 or 3 years ago at those annual rosters of what's in and what's out, or who's in and who's out. We just had the Academy Awards, we see who's in and who's out. But now, you sort of ask, climate events, environmental stewardship, things of this sort. 2 or 3 years ago, it would have been a very different discussion I think we have right now. So I think many of the folks, and I think we should just be realistic, America was out of Paris, it's now back in Paris. And of course, we now have Glasgow coming up. And so as we begin thinking about how we bring the world on responsible environmental stewardship and climate issues, I think we've got a great panel, and very diverse panel. Let me introduce them. We have Neve McCarthy, who's Senior Environmental, Social, and Governance Analyst at Climate Advisors. And Climate Advisors is one of the sponsors of this report, along with the UK government. It's a US Green Economy Report series. I highly recommend it. We're going to discuss it in a moment. It was co-sponsored by the UK government, Climate Advisors, and the University of Maryland. I think it's Center for Global Sustainability, my apologies. And in that, it's a very good report. We also then are going to have a panel of, I'm going to introduce them now because I'd like them to be involved in the beginning as well. Dan Byers is Vice President for Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Energy Institute. We have Tom Thackeray as the Director of Infrastructure for the Confederation of British Industry. And we have Hannah Young, who is Deputy Consul General at the British Consulate in New York City. Great panel. So let me just start with you, Neve, and just ask you, in this whiplash moment of moving from one to the other, tell us what gap your report is trying to bridge and what it says, the highlights. It's a long report.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is 25 state reports and a national report and an appendix. So it's over 700 pages of reports. It's a pretty significant and comprehensive analysis, and I think that's really what sets it apart. We have fantastic research that's been done in all of these different sectors across the country and at the state level, and we have also fantastic highlight research that's been done in reports that have been released. But I think this report is really, unprecedented in both its scope and the comprehensiveness of it. So we're really hoping that will help in terms of increasing the granularity of these discussions and bipartisan agreement and cross-border collaboration going forward. So I can give you a little bit of background and then tell you a little bit about what's in the report to start with.
It would be good, but can I just jump in just to, the one thing that jumped out to me very quickly, and you can go anywhere you like with it, but the thing I'd like to ask is, as we sort of sit about national governments, we see the UK stepping forward with Glasgow. We see other national governments coming forward. The thing that really caught my eye was that it's subnational actors that are making the difference in the game. We may all want to feel good about what's going on. We may hear what President Biden just did, recently with world leaders, but they're not really where the action is. And do I have that right? And then you can go on and tell us anything more about the report.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I think it also increases the US's credibility when making promises in this area, because you see President Biden and the US stepping forward again now on the federal level. But, when you look past over the past couple of years, we're coming out of a period where state governments were really leading the US climate ambition in the absence of federal ambition, right? So we have 13 states and 165 cities that adopted 100% clean energy commitments, up from just one state and 33 cities in 2017. We've had massive action in these areas, and the states have really been carrying action forward over the past couple of years. So that's really, really important. And we just have a fantastic opportunity now to combine that state action with increasing federal action and cross-border collaboration to accelerate the green economy at a scale we just haven't seen before. So that's really exciting. There's huge reductions planned in the US and the UK. So there's also massive opportunity to partner at both the state and the national level. Remember that states like California has 64 MOUs or international bilateral agreements with other countries. So you do see states that we're looking at that have been acting on the global stage and hopefully will continue to do so in combination with the federal government. And then looking at the US, the states are just incredibly diverse in terms of geography, economic and political environments, technical resource potential, so much more. So really where this report fits in is, by publishing these 25 different reports and 9 different green economy sectors in our summary report, we're really trying to provide a snapshot that combines this qualitative analysis with some comparative indicators on some of the drivers of the green economy. And as I say, with the goal of enabling more comprehensive discussion as we move forward towards the Glasgow COP. And then really quick in terms of the contents of the report, our state and sector overviews include analysis of key drivers, key players, near-term potential, data-driven indicators. We incorporated a variety of perspectives and expertise from interviews with over 40 stakeholders in industry and NGOs and across the board. And finally, we put together jobs modeling in 4 different sectors with high near-term growth. So really, as I say, in total, it's a mammoth report series with about 700 pages available. We just launched the website this morning at usgreeneconomy.com. So definitely encourage those on the call to check it out. And I will say we've really focused on making these reports really easy to read, really easy to understand, a lot of interactive visualizations. And we also came up with a color-coded rating system so that you can quickly understand the near-term outlook for a particular state and a particular technology. So we really hope that it's going to be, a comprehensive go-to resource in the green economy at the state level.
Neve, one of the things that comes up, and I'm sure we're going to get into this with Dan and our other panelists, but when you kind of look at the mathematical equation of those platforms that contribute energy across the board, and you look, some of it's in fossils, some of it's in wind and solar, some of it's in new technologies. Another part of it, which I liked about the report, is it got into conservation, new practices, new technology that are even relevant in the oil and gas sector. But one of the things that you prioritized in the report was electrification, that electricity was driving this, and that I sort of thought that you had, let 1,000 flowers bloom around that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that framing?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and glad you picked up on that, because interconnection is a really big topic here. When you look at the electrification trend and just looking at grid and utilities in general, that is a key connector across the board, right? We have interaction with electric vehicles via charging stations. We have interaction with energy storage. You have utility storage that's covered, as well as distributed resources. And really just, looking at energy generation, CCUS and hydrogen would contribute in that regard. So we do really center this analysis around industries connected to electrification trends, as well as looking at energy efficiency, because really for electrification, you have a couple of key drivers in terms of increasing energy efficiency, increasing demand response programs, and then potentially increasing infrastructure and transmission lines and upgrading our grid. So I think that's a really important takeaway. I think it's also important to note, in this analysis that we're looking at a lot more than like wind and solar. So those have been the sectors that have been focused on most frequently in the past. And we're basically just looking at the sectors that we think are growing quickly and are likely to play a role in both job creation and decarbonization going forward. And you can see exponential growth as well in sectors like energy storage, electric vehicle, offshore wind. So there's a lot more to the green economy that isn't talked about quite as much.
One last question before I jump to our panel is we hear a lot about jobs, and so even when President Biden is now out talking, as he will tonight, I'm sure, about coming infrastructure embedded in that, and I think they've been very upfront about it, is going to be an orientation around climate and trying to incentivize creation of new jobs. But when you kind of look at the broad side, part of new job creation is always pay attention to job loss. Do you deal with transition issues as you begin thinking about moving into new technologies and new opportunities, which is in the plus account? What hangs out in the minus account?
Yeah, I think that's really, really essential also in order to drive kind of bipartisan agreement on this, because you have a lot of states, even with split governments, that have been making progress in this area that have a heavy reliance in the fossil fuel industry. And it's really important that workers have clear line of sight to job opportunities in the future. We have seen some sectors that have some overlap with skill sets that we're seeing in the fossil fuel industry. So for example, you have some offshore wind, you have CCUS, hydrogen, some geothermal, which wasn't covered in the report. But you also have like the need for universal and financed retraining, because the estimates we're looking at, the scale of expansion in clean energy, we have 12 megawatts of offshore wind right now, and President Biden's goal is 30 gigawatts by 2030. We have state goals of over 25 gigawatts. So the scale of this growth is so big that we just really need to, increase apprenticeship programs, training programs, and much more in order to incorporate a lot more people into the green economy, and also look at ways to, increase well-paid jobs in this sector. We already have, 3 times as many jobs in the green economy and clean energy than fossil fuels. So it's great to see the growth expanding already.
That's terrific. Well, let's bring in Dan, Tom, and Hannah, and let's pretend this is like the view on, the future green economy. Dan, I was sort of looking at the all of the above question on different energy sources, but as a in your role at the chamber and sort of thinking about the future of energy, what are the dimensions of this report and what it's outlined that give you pause and give you hope?
Well, thanks, Steve. And I don't think anything gives me pause. And I would start out, should commend climate advisors and the UK government on the report. As a policy nerd, when I get reports like these, my favorite thing to do is just read through them and sort of nitpick flaws and find things wrong with it. And I read it and was very impressed. I think it's very well balanced, extremely thorough, and as Neve said, it really covers the waterfront. And so that aligns with where our members are. We're all rowing, I think, the business community in the same direction, really, in recent years. And so, we've say over and over, we need a kitchen sink approach right now. We need to be looking at all the different sectors. Electrification is, of course, stands out. It tends to be lower hanging fruit, but as we look over the midterm and long term, we have to be looking at other opportunities such as hydrogen, nature-based solutions, et cetera. So this is really an excellent roadmap as we look at both the subnational and national policies that can attract investment in low carbon solutions.
Well, thank you. And Hannah, I'd love to bring you in and not only just to respond to the report, but talk about, as we dive down into some of the relevant issues. Again, there's a lot in this report. What I liked a lot, looking at cities, smart cities, conservation, the world of data, 5G, sensors is going to lead to a very different, set of conservation opportunities. But, as someone who, not only sitting in New York City, but also looking at London, looking at the great cities of the world, love any comments on, what's coming that helps move this green economic horizon forward.
Thank you, Steve. And I also want to thank climate advisors for this hugely important piece of work. I think it finally debunks the myth that there is a trade-off between economic growth and climate solutions. That's something that we saw in the UK between 1990 and 2018 as we started to phase coal out of our energy mix, and yet at the same time grew our economy by 75%. And I think these reports clearly demonstrate that there is huge potential and power at the subnational level. We've seen that already through a number of collaborations between the UK and the US government. But I think this gives us even more of a roadmap, particularly at a localized level, to really target our support and our opportunities to collaborate. The UK and the US already signed an agreement in 2019 to partner on a wide range of science and tech solutions around clean energy. And I think these reports give us even more meat on the bones to help support states and cities, and crucially also businesses, to support the efforts at the federal level. And to your point earlier, ultimately this is a fused approach, right? We need national action, we need subnational action, we also need action at the multilateral level that we will see as a key part of COP26 in November.
What do you, I mean, just so, as a point of, because I don't know, I know President Biden has laid out numbers of, and please correct me, folks, if I'm wrong, 50% reduction from 2005 levels. Has the UK laid out targets of its own?
So we've also committed to a 68% reduction as part of our formal NDC.
68% from 2005?
I think it's from 1990 levels.
So you're doing better than us, maybe.
Well, I mean, the UK has always been a world leader in this space. And as our ambassador also pointed out, we more recently, as part of the President Biden summit, then committed to a further 78% reduction by 2035. So the UK government is really championing this increased need for ambition, recognising that at the moment, actually, even with all of the NDCs currently on the table, we're still not quite there in terms of keeping global warming temperatures certainly below 2 degrees, but to the crucial 1.5 degrees. So we do need to increase ambition across the board. And that's why actually these reports and action at a subnational level is so crucial as part of that solution.
Yeah, thank you for that. Tom, I was going to, have some fun and just say, is British industry friend or foe in this process? But I won't give you such an easy pass. But let me just ask, as you look at British industry and you look at, right now, so if you look at across the world, every big company I know has its climate plans, its carbon emissions plans. Whether you're a bank, whether you're I talked to the CEO of Occidental Petroleum the other day, Vicky Hollop, on what she's planning to do to create the world's largest direct air carbon capture system. Is going to be huge. We've seen other big firms come forward. So I guess my question is, would love to hear from you about where British industry is, particularly on the infrastructure side. But what are some of the gaps we need to be aware of when we think about private industry and their approach, and what helps them get into alignment on these goals? What gets in the way?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think definitely recognizing that picture you're painting about the corporate world becoming just more and more interested in this, it becoming more embedded in the strategy and the day-to-day process. And I think years gone by, I think the environmental sustainability and action against climate change has been sort of a race to the bottom on standards, but more increasingly it's been a race to the top, because businesses are recognizing the opportunities that they can and the sort of first mover advantages of acting quickly. So there's massive sort of technology advancement that's taking place because of that investment in the corporate world. I also think that they're using it to differentiate themselves, to make themselves a more attractive employer. There's the new workforce is going to demand that the companies they work for are taking this stuff seriously. So it's how you market yourself to a new and dynamic workforce. Investor community is also demanding it. So if you want a cheaper cost of capital, frankly, then you're going to have to demonstrate to your investor base that you're taking this stuff seriously, and you can report on the actions that you've taken. And I think that the final point in terms of what's what's causing the action is the fact that more and more businesses are actually impacted by extreme weather events. Here in the UK, we've had, a much greater frequency of flood events, which are having a real impact on businesses as well as communities and societies. There's that real world impact, which is getting people to sit up and take notice. In terms of the barriers, I think it's just a very complex issue for some companies. So the most fundamental challenge that businesses face is in those scope 3 emissions. So they're quite happy sort of getting a feel for what they're currently in control of, but when it comes to extending into their supply chains, particularly when they're global, interdependent, getting a feel for what they need to do to get a handle on emissions on that global basis is quite complicated. So that's where collaboration really helps, I think, and that's where the fact that you have a level playing field with countries acting across the world with the same motivations and the same objectives in mind makes it easier for companies to move in lockstep.
Well, thank you for that. Let me just ask you to, I'm going to tell the audience, prepare your questions, and I am going to be managing this for about 10 more minutes, and then our good friend Josh Stanton is going to come in and moderate questions to our panelists. And Neve, you should feel free to jump in anytime as well. But let me go back to Dan and all of you for a moment and ask, without talking too much about the last administration, but one of the castings of the Trump administration was that that while America in this case was thinking about creating more climate friendly regulation, it was putting itself out of competitiveness, at a competitiveness disadvantage with nations and companies around the world that were not doing that. So I'm interested in how you create a race to the top and avoid a race to the bottom when it comes to competitiveness in industry and energy. We see, China investing heavily in these areas. Glasgow is not just about the UK and the US, it's about the world coming together. India, to my knowledge, is a bit recalcitrant about stepping forward. But when you look at that kind of broad issue of getting ready to move upward, a rise that's positive as opposed to a race to the bottom on some of these issues, what are the important features of that on how to get that right and to encourage other global stakeholders not to take the road to the bottom? Dan?
Yeah, well, look, that's an excellent question. And we talk to our members all the time about these sorts of things. And I think, the one theme maybe that we've heard from our folks is durability and policy and certainty. I mean, our members would probably take less than ideal policy if they knew that they had some certainty that their investments would make sense, and they certainly see a lot of opportunity to export climate solutions to the rest of the world. And so in that sense, at the federal level, obviously we've had the opposite of durability. We have just a pendulum going back and forth. And so I think that you don't see that as much at the state level. And so that's, to me, one of the distinguishing features at the state and local level. It doesn't matter if it's blue state, purple state, or red state. Usually when they enact a policy, it tends to be pretty stable, and that's very attractive for our members. And that's what's going to make the difference in the long run. If we can have these states sort of be the laboratories of climate policy, if you will, as a proving ground to demonstrate some of the new technologies, then that investment is just going to flow from there.
Your thoughts, Hannah?
So I would definitely agree with Dan on that. And I think that's something that has characterized the nature of the relationship between the UK government and business. If you take zero emission vehicles as a good example of that, it feels like government and business has been on a journey talking to each other about what is achievable and bringing forward its level of ambition over the course of the next 20 years, almost playing cat and mouse, to the point where the UK government has now committed to phasing out internal combustion engines by 2030. And that's 10 years earlier. And that's partly us pushing industry to go further, but that's also us talking to industry and saying, okay, what is feasible? What is the new technology now looking like? How can we create the kinds of batteries that will allow us to mass export these vehicles at scale? So I think there is something about setting the policy trajectory so that industry can then respond to it and realize opportunity. But I think actually bringing it back to these reports, it's also very clear that there is opportunity across the board here. And actually, it doesn't matter what your R&D risk appetite is as a company. You know, there are investment opportunities everywhere, from offshore wind, you know, which is now actually a very well established industry, through to new technology that needs to be mass produced, like batteries in zero emission vehicles, through to investment in the really cutting edge technology like green hydrogen. So I think actually it's that there is just such a great opportunity to invest now. And obviously the train is leaving the station. You know, we know that this is the direction of travel. And so actually, you know, we all need to get on board and look at what those opportunities are and help shape them now before it's too late.
You know, before I jump to Tom and Niamh, I want to ask you one more question, Hannah. You know, I know that while you try to go native in America and hang out with Americans in the local bars, you also know the international community in New York really well. What's the kind of mood of the international community in New York with this? You know, in the circles you run, I mean, I hate to be blunt, but I mean, climate change issues used to be a lift, a slog. You know, has the weight come off? Is morale good? How does the international community that you're interacting with in the New York scene look at this agenda?
So I suspect in New York, it's probably not that different to other cities around the US. And I think, you know, there is wide recognition that this is a hugely important topic. We have the backdrop of New York State, you know, making some really important, ambitious commitments in this agenda. New York City, we are working very closely with, including on their own legislation around zero emission vehicles. So there is a real buzz. We obviously have New York Climate Week coming down the track in September, which I think will be a really important staging post in the run up to COP26 and UNGA as well, to bring the multilateral dimension in. So I think it's, you know, it's a very positive environment. The other thing I would say about New York in particular, and we are working very hard on this at the consulate, is obviously New York is the one of the main financial capitals around the world as well. So we are working with the financial sector to look at how they can play their part, both in supporting climate finance and our commitments to achieving the Paris commitment to 100 billion, but also in how they can lead the way in their own transition to net zero, and the work that Mark Carney's doing around more transparent reporting of where the money goes as well.
Great. So buzzy, you said it's buzzy and up. Okay, that's great. I'm gonna get Tom and then Niamh, and this has been wonderful. Tom?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on how you sort of bring business on board with it. And I think the experience in the UK has been really driven by the fact that actually the cost of some of these technologies has just driven down so much over recent years. So, you know, just looking back 5 or 10 years ago, the cost of offshore wind in the auctions that we hold, you know, there was a significant subsidy, but that's dramatically reduced in recent years as the cost.
So water can now run downhill.
Exactly, yeah. So if you're comparing the fossil fuel comparator, you know, it actually makes sense to go further and faster, and that gives businesses confidence. I would say there has been policy certainty in the UK as well. There's sort of that political consensus and that long lead time regulation. So yes, have regulation, but you know, you've got that, you're setting that point in the future. Then the conversation with industry becomes, yes, we can do this if, and you can get that sort of negotiation kind of space with government where, you know, say on electric vehicle side, how do we invest in the gigafactories that are going to develop the technologies that are going to give us world leadership position in this kind of space? And then finally, I guess it's just around the acknowledgement of the fact that some of the side effects, the negative impacts, aren't going to be felt evenly in different geographies or different sectors of the economy, and just having a real plan for that just transition and the investment in the skills and retraining programs that are going to enable those shifts in the economy to take place over time.
Right. Thank you. That's great. Niamh, in our last minute, I want to ask you to, you know, have the last word, at least with me, and then you can continue to respond to questions. But, you know, one of the other dimensions of Glasgow and this discussion is there are parts of the world that can't afford the technologies, even though the cost is coming down. So what you know, Tom just shared about the cost coming down helps, but there are technology licensing issues. There are different places, you know, a lot of You know, there are parts of the world that say, hey, you know, this is why they're still on coal. Rajiv Shah, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, is out there trying to make major investments as a philanthropy organization in the world to try and find partnerships to address the parts of the world that may not have the resources that the leaders in Glasgow and, you know, at least in the UK and US have, and other big stakeholders. So I just, in a minute, can you share with us, are there developments that help even this out so that as we achieve greater savings and greater, you know, green economy achievements in this part of the world, that we're not seeing them taken away in parts of the developing world that cannot play at the same level right now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially when you think about the potential to leapfrog technologies and to really, really drastically reduce emissions in some of these areas. We have seen a lot of progress in these areas. Obviously, there's a major challenge around infrastructure in some places and energy access in general. I think one thing when you look at this, you know, in line with the conversation we've been having, right, the private sector has been really instrumental in driving down some of the cost of these technologies. And in Texas and Arizona, that's a prime example, right, where despite regulatory hesitancy, there's major investment in these areas. But I will say that when you look at, like, say, for example, the 2009 Obama stimulus plan, you know, production tax credit, investment tax credits, they've really contributed to the decrease in cost in some of these technologies. And that's what's, you know, one of the factors that's allowing these technologies to become so widespread around the world. And if the US can really do the same for other technologies, then you know, other countries will have the opportunity to leapfrog to those as well. I think, you know, as I say, CCUS, hydrogen, we're doing more in terms of offshore wind now. So there's a lot of technologies where if you really expand investment here and especially accelerate it at the federal level, that we can make significant progress.
So maybe all of our viewers now have the link for the report, but there'll be people who watch this later. Where can they access the US Green Economy Report series, Neve?
Yep, so it's very simple, actually. It's usgreeneconomy.com. And you'll find there our national report, which compares all 25 of our state reports, as well as each of the reports on the states we covered.
Well, listen, I want to thank the UK Embassy in the USA for organizing this today. Thank you, Neve. Neve McCarthy, who is Senior Environmental, Social, and Governance Analyst at Climate Advisors, a great communicator on these issues as well. Hannah Young, who is Deputy Consul General at the British Consulate in New York City. Tom Thackeray, Director of Infrastructure for the Confederation of the British Industries, and Dan Byers, Vice President for Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Energy Institute. Thank you all for our discussion. Now, Joshua Stanton of the British Embassy Public Affairs Division is going to carry on with questions from all of you. And I just want to remind you all that you can ask a question of our panelists by submitting your questions through the Q&A function on the middle taskbar. At this time, you're all practice Zoom-ites, I assume, so you can handle it. But I want to thank you all very much again, and my apologies for having to run a bit early.
Steve, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Fantastic discussion you've led today. As Steve mentioned, we'll dive right into the audience Q&A. And just as a reminder, do please submit your questions through the Q&A function, and I will share those with our panelists. We'll go right into the first question, which is from Ivan Baldwin, who is from the UK Nuclear Industry Council member. It mentions that the UK's 10-point plan includes a prominent role for nuclear energy to deliver reliable caseload energy, and its pedigree in creating jobs in economically challenged regions is compelling. How does it factor into this discussion, particularly to advance green economic growth at the federal and state level? So perhaps for this to start, Hannah, maybe I can turn to you first to kind of expand on the Prime Minister's 10-point plan and how nuclear fits in. And then Neve and Dan, I might turn to you for sort of how it might relate to the on the US side of things. So Hannah, would you like to tee off?
Sure. So the 10-point plan was published by our Prime Minister late last year, and it essentially is a very granular plan to demonstrate UK action across a range of different topics. And it essentially shows that there is, exactly as we are talking today, both an environmental case and an economic case to investing in green solutions. As our ambassador said, the plan would encourage 250,000 jobs, £12 billion of UK investment, and we think probably 3 times as much from the private sector. But the question makes a really important point about the fact that this also aligns to the UK government's levelling up agenda, which is really important about how we grow economies of those communities outside of the southeast that traditionally haven't seen as much economic growth. And actually, you only have to look at sectors like offshore wind, which is very prevalent in the northeast of our country, and the investment that we are placing in that industry in particular, to see that actually, reaching these communities who may not have seen that economic growth as much is really the bedrock of that 10-point plan. Likewise with hydrogen, where I think we are about to pilot a really interesting way of heating, I think around 600 homes in Teesside, again also in the north. So the 10-point plan is a really important way of also supporting the government's agenda. I think bringing it back to the conversation around these reports, it also demonstrates that regional variation really matters. And actually, it's about understanding the local dynamics, local economies, understanding what local solutions are needed, and helping communities make that transition, as we've talked about previously. And I think, that is also true when you look at these 25 reports. Actually, the regional variation is really huge. And so we need to be focusing our efforts in a way that makes sense locally. Oh, Josh, I think you're still on mute.
It is impossible to go without talking unmuted on Zoom. Neve, would you like to kind of come in on the US side?
Yeah, so one point on this, I mean, every state report, you'll see the electric generation mix, and it becomes very clear very quickly that a lot of states do rely upon nuclear as a key source of electricity, and obviously a key zero emission source. I will say that kind of innovation and investment in this area has stalled. So we have a lot of kind of older technology. So there could be some opportunity for advanced solutions here. It wasn't a sector covered in the analysis, but I do encourage our viewers to look at the energy generation mix and get a feel for which sectors each of the states relies on.
And if I could just expand on that briefly, Neve is right that we have 100 nuclear plants in the U.S. that generate 20% of our electricity. So they're really a workhorse of the grid that's sometimes underappreciated, but they are very much aging. And so there is a lot of excitement for advanced nuclear solutions. And just last December, the Energy Act of 2020, we think gives a good kickstart to future reactors, which are going to fit into the future grid much better, because we have this issue now where with intermittent renewables, wind and solar, traditional nuclear does not ramp up and down very well, but we have fast reactors that the Department of Energy will demonstrate and will hopefully get licensed, and there'll be investment interest in deploying not only in the U.S. and out of the world and around the world, but they will pair much better with renewables on the grid and be a great long-term solution.
Our next question is from Marcus Watson, who is a business leader and member of the CBI's Energy and Climate Change Committee. Marcus says, it seems an impossible task to level the playing field on tackling CO2 emissions on the world stage without carbon taxes on imported goods. Thanks to their strength and aligned values, the US, the EU, and the UK are in an enviable position to make this happen. Is this something that we think is in that sort of do it category? Is this possible, or is this sort of in a too difficult category that he asked? I might approach this first from more of a business perspective, and maybe start with Tom and then maybe from Dan. From a business point of view, the proposal that Marcus is talking about of tackling carbon emissions through taxes on imports, is that something that you see as the path forward in terms of more businesses making that green transition?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we've got to bring into the mix and the debate. I think carbon border adjustments is something which is very actively discussed both at the UK level and within the EU context as well. I think the difficulty is in the the nature of global supply chains and sort of measurement criteria, and it gets very complicated very quickly when you sort of get into the detail of it. But there's no doubt that the UK, as with many developed nations, has an interest in retaining particularly heavy industry. In the UK, it's important to retain some foundation industry and some strength in that in those kind of sectors. And to do that, it's important that you sort of look at the level playing field issues that persist along the globe in the global economy. I think another point to mention is just on measurement, and just to understand how you're doing at a national level when it comes to consumption emissions as well as production emissions. And that's something that the CBI has sort of been advocating for a while, is just to make sure that we are comparing apples with apples and really have a good sense of what we're doing to cut emissions in a real sense, rather than just exporting them overseas.
I agree with Tom, and I think the question is on target. Leakage is an issue and a concern, and we have a lot of energy-intensive, trade-exposed industries here that are concerned about rising power sector costs or otherwise making them less competitive around the world. I think here in the U.S. we're sort of watching what Europe is going to do, because as Tom points out, while the problem is clear, the solution is really complex administratively, how you measure it, how you actually make it fit under the WTO trade guidelines, et cetera. And so we tend to be a little bit behind, but we're eagerly watching the EU's proposal, which I believe is supposed to come out in June of this year.
Fantastic. Our next question is from Chris, who joins us from the Massachusetts, New Hampshire border. He writes, how optimistic are you that building codes and building can be used to enforce energy efficiency? He says, for example, Canadian efforts to require net zero or passive house standards have included two new subsets, retrofit and new construction. Do these play a major factor in enforcing energy efficiency as part of sort of our overall government efforts to tackle climate change? Hannah, maybe I might start. It does, in terms of sort of the UK's plans, how they look at sort of nationally combating climate change, does building construction energy efficiency in sort of building codes play a factor in that?
So I have to confess, I'm not an expert in building energy efficiency, but I do know that it is part of our plan. And I know that there are new energy efficiency standards for new build construction in the UK. The UK also has a lot of older properties, and so we are also looking at ways to insulate those homes. I live in a conservation area in the UK, and we had a real struggle trying to get double glazed windows in because of the local guidelines around like for like. And I think, those are areas that we need to continue to look again to see what we can do to deal with the huge number of properties in the UK that are quite old. Another aspect that the UK is very focused on is around heat pumps and phasing out of combined boilers, and trying to bring in heat pumps. Now, as is always the case with these things, the technology initially is very expensive, but actually we're seeing the cost of heat pumps go down in a similar way, in a similar pattern to other energy sources like this. So again, and that's through both government incentives, but also, giving certainty to the industry that this is an area that we see as part of, the future solution for homes. So I know that's another area that's of particular focus to us in the UK. And that brings in hydrogen as well down the line as a further potential solution to support heating technology.
Wonderful, thank you, Hannah. Our next question is from Holly Perker, who's the director of the UNE North at the University of New England. She writes, how do we use policy to build equity and accessibility to the benefits of green economy to underserved and rural communities? Niamh, I might actually throw this to you. In terms of the Green Economy Report, what were sort of the trends that you've noticed about the ways that rural communities do play in sort of this green economy transition, and perhaps how policy, particularly at the city and state level, is looking at those communities and playing a role?
Yeah, I'd say this comes into play in a number of areas. I guess the first I'll just mention, since we just talked about energy efficiency, that is one of the areas where I think a common theme across the board was using a lot of incentives for retrofits, for example. And one good example of this is increased incentives in low-income areas, so that we can really expand the accessibility to the green economy across communities. So that's really, you know, a positive legislative step that states can take. Also, when you look at more agricultural communities, we have a lot of rural incentives in terms of increasing solar and wind in these areas. And then they were also really key in terms of like the waste to energy sector. So especially around the Midwest, we're seeing major production in terms of biofuels. We're also looking at you know, the biogas potential and the reliance on biomass as an electricity source. And what we're excited about in the waste to energy sector is really looking at the, you know, whether it's animal waste, municipal solid waste, organic waste from commercial and industry. These areas can also really reduce waste, but then also contribute to the electricity mix. So it is very, very important that we really expand the green economy across all of these sectors. And I would also just add, you know, the clean energy industry, it's no secret that it does have a diversity problem. It's less diverse than you know, the national job market, I guess. So I think it's really important that these sectors also represent the communities that they're serving, and that's going to require more investment and training from companies as well.
And then just as a follow-up to that, Hannah and Tama, I might throw this to you. In terms of the role that sort of the stream transition plays in the UK, is there particular best practices or sort of areas of where we've had sort of a success in integrating some of those rural communities into a green economy in a way that is looking at sort of, as Neve mentioned, that economic growth, that those the potential to add jobs, and that we're not leaving particular parts of a community behind?
I think that for me, the one that springs to mind is in the North Sea, in the northeast of England. We've just agreed a North Sea transition deal, which obviously the Northeast of England has been characterised by sort of the oil and gas industry and a lot of jobs and a lot of investment in that kind of area. So obviously will be a big part of the transition. So what's happened is that industry, alongside the government, has come together and sort of try to pick out what kind of investment is going to be needed to support the transition and to help it move into sort of more profitable and more fulfilling from a jobs perspective opportunities in the future. And I think, you know, particularly in the hydrogen economy and carbon capture and storage, there is big opportunities in the UK's geography to start transitioning that way. But it's really been about that industry coming together as a whole and getting around the table with the UK government to develop a really concrete plan, which has investment backing behind it.
And I think that's a really good example. And just to make a further point, I think you know, we touched on it previously. There are challenges to making the transition. So not every new job will be a direct replacement for a previous one. You know, people will need upskilling. They might not be in the same place. So, you know, we need transport and infrastructure to support communities in, you know, going to the new wind turbine factory, you know, which may be further away from their homes. So, you know, I think all of that requires a whole system approach locally. You know, we need councils, businesses, you know, cities to come together and really understand how we can support communities make that transition in a way that is equitable and fair, and bringing their voice into it as well, which I think is, you know, is really important.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we are coming up on the 12 o'clock hour, so we will have to call time on our questions for today. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us. This has been a really fantastic discussion, and also thank you so much to our audience members for joining as well. As mentioned, you can access and view the Green Economy Report for yourself at www.usgreeneconomy.com. And with that, we will close. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us, and hope everybody has a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.